Okay, my apologies for not getting this up a little bit earlier. I have been in bed with the flu for the last few days and not able to sit in front of a computer to get this done. And I'm expecting to cough and splutter my way through it, so I apologise for that as well. This week, week 9, financial management, and about how we need to understand something about financial management in terms of our own leadership. So I'm going to race through some basics on financial management. I'm going to refer you back to your set text, which has a very good section on it, to help you with your tutorial task. And it's not about you understanding balance sheets and being able to draw them up. It's understanding how they work and what they mean and what information they can give you and how you can use that in your roles in leadership. So some basic, very, very basic accounting language and principles and processes, the link between some of the legislative requirements that we need to use and pedagogical requirements that will occur within that, income and expenditure cycles, also looking at being able to read some financial statements that inform strategic planning. And it may have been something that could have been useful for that little piece of work we did around strategic planning around that centre had loan numbers coming in the following year. And being able to respond to the local community political changes which influence our organisation's finances. Again, something that may have been useful for you to have had knowledge about in that previous piece of work, which you may want to go back and think about. So when you get this behind you, would you actually do something differently with some of this knowledge? Would you look at things slightly differently? Okay, a few images, more so than text this time around, but they're kind of useful. So as I said, it's really important that you understand, you're aware of, and competent at least with some financial matters which impact your centre's business capacity. Now, we need to be able to understand financial matters, we need to be able to engage and participate in them. And in doing that, we should be able to support our centre in achieving its vision, its mission and strategic plan. Now, the amount of money we are talking about can be sizable, and we're going to have a look at a couple of centres in a moment that have got budgets of over $1 million. And that's not unheard of, obviously. I have run centres myself with budgets of over $1 million. My budget at the Children's Hospital was considerably more than that. So it's important we're talking about lots and lots of money. However, small errors in that, or small financial planning errors in that, can have a huge impact. So the sorts of money we're talking about is money required for staffing, for resources, for professional development and for projects as examples. And in doing this, I think it's worth starting to think about early childhood centres as a small business. And I really hate to say that because pedagogically it doesn't sit well with me. But I do know very well if we don't keep our finances in check, our centres don't run. And if we keep our finances in check, we can actually run those pedagogical strategies, those visions and missions that we believe in so strongly. So it's really important to keep this in perspective, but understand how it works. So we suggest, or I believe, that we need to be involved in that financial decision making, especially decisions related to expenditure and income, and the decisions that we make are more likely to reflect our philosophy in the centre. So as leaders, we can reflect the centre's philosophy rather than bringing in a financial manager who is only going to look at the balance sheet and work out where the money's coming from, where it's going to, and where to make the cuts. Now, in saying this, we're not suggesting that all decisions need to involve everyone, but some decisions need to be quite strategically placed. Examples around that. When I worked at the Children's Hospital, and certainly when I worked in long day care, I had controls of very large budgets. Now, there's some parts of that budget I had to manage, mainly because it was around staffing, it was around what we were required to do legislatively. That was important. But I did give some areas over to staff. We were able to have a look at areas they could make some decisions. Let's cut back on internet access. Let's increase in this area. Let's see if we can manage things this way. So the expenditure side of it, except for staff salaries and what I was required to pay, they were able to play around with a little bit. And what that did for them was allow them to think about their pedagogy, allow them to think about their programming and what they needed to engage in effective programming and to get that to work. Excuse me. What does that do for them? it actually means that they're more engaged in the process and they're more willing to share and work together with others about how we can spend money. They're also more willing to make those cuts in areas we needed to make cuts. They say, okay, let's not spend so much on the telephone, let's not spend so much on this. Being aware of where the money went was really, really important. We also use them, or I'd often use them, in making decisions about the level of staff we would employ. Being able to say to them, if we employ somebody at this level, then we are going to have to cut back somewhere else. Or if we employ somebody at a lower level, we might be able to get through with changes. And there were times when we disagree on that and the staff would say we really want somebody at a higher level. Those conversations were had, but we were able to discuss those in terms of our philosophy, our vision and our mission. So they're very clear about helping us make those decisions. They also got engaged when I worked with them about how we would cut back. And in healthcare, it often happened our budget would be reduced. So you would get told a 1.5% cut across the board. You make the decisions where they come from. And in those areas, we were able to say to staff, okay, let's have a discussion around that. If we're over budget in certain areas, we'd certainly sit down with staff and have discussions about it. We're over budget, what are we going to do about it? Is this something we need to budget for differently next year? But what are we going to do to cut back so we can get through the rest of the year? So there's those sorts of things, and I think that's really important in terms of understanding leadership and finances, that if we engage staff in the process, we're more likely to have outcomes that are actually going to work pedagogically as well as work financially. I'm also very clear that we had money given to us, and I really believe we should be strong on this, that if you're given money for special projects, that money should be quarantined for that purpose only. That if, and I did have, was it the children's, well over $500,000 given to me annually by a particular organisation to run a particular program, and that money had to be quarantined for that program and that program only, and I felt like I was under obligation to do that. And I think that's a really important thing to do. Again, why do you give this over to staff? And I believe it's about staff that understand the management of finances and the processes related to planning that budget and ensuring a balanced budget, that is the outgoings don't exceed the incomings. It supports the stability of the staff and the success, and Mandela calls it social capital of community, and I think that's in part what it is. They understand it, they'll engage in it. Excuse me again. I think it is important, though, to think about early childhood services at times as a small business. Doesn't sit well with me because pedagogically it doesn't work for me in terms of my philosophy and belief in early childhood. But if we don't do this, we don't stay open, and we don't stay open, we don't do the pedagogy we want to do. So in any small business, then, sound financial management is important. If not, if there's more money going out than there is coming in, the centre becomes financially unviable and it closes. When the financial management is sound, there is provision to allow for quality programs. When it's not sound, there's no provision to allow that to occur. I'm not saying high amounts of income actually leads to high quality. It doesn't. But it actually provides you with an opportunity to develop high quality. And it's just about being balanced. It's not about being lots of money. It's about being balanced, knowing what's coming in and what's going out. I also think being aware of the latest government reforms and the potential reforms gives you an opportunity to strategic plan. So we know that next year we've got another year of 1 year preschool education for every 4-year-old prior to going to school. We are aware that's 15 hours. We don't know what's going to happen the year after that, but being aware of that means that we can start to think about what may we do if that stops. What would our next step be? We can start to think about strategic planning. So we involve our leaders in the centre in that process to help us ensure that the philosophy and vision is kept in sight, being aware we may have some changes to how we work. So other areas we need to consider. Any national and state requirements related to funding, any licensing issues and any quality improvement issues in particular sit within that framework. Nearly always these are related to some form of cost. There's time periods involved with them, and there's often a deadline. You will have it done by this particular date. And they carry pedagogical responsibilities and require decisions that we need to relate to practice, that are related to staff qualifications, to ratios, to teaching responsibilities, to the routines in our centres, to record keeping. They're all linked to financial considerations. I'm going to consider a couple of issues, just put them on the table for you, which actually has you thinking back to your discussions around ethical decision making, some budgeting, some just how we work with people, and staff and being engaged in making this decision. You have a staff member who's going to take extended leave. Now, let's say it's long service leave, and I'm saying that for a particular reason. When you set your budgets, you always make a provision for long service leave. You know somebody's close to take, you actually put that money aside. So you have extra money that's ready to cover that long service leave. They could be away for something like 3 months on a long service leave. At the same time, you need to cover that position. So you really pay 2 salaries for the one position for that period of time. Now, if a person is ready for long service leave, it's likely they've been with you for a long period of time. Considerable experience, they're likely to have undertaken their validation and probably functioning at the top level. Now, even though you've budgeted cover for that, you've got a couple of options in terms of how you cover it. You can cover with somebody with the same level. You can cover somebody, bring in somebody and cover with a lower level. There's a financial difference between the two. And you need to consider, do you need one or the other? And for what reason would you need that? I used to go back to the staff and have a conversation with them. We've got 3 months. What do we want to do? What level are we going to be looking at? And why would we do that? And how does it impact our vision and our mission? Sometimes we have particular people who've been working with us for a while that we thought we'd just move into the position. That was another decision we made. But you need to think about the financial ramifications of that. Much harder to go if somebody needs leave at the bottom end, excuse me, the lower level, and put somebody in at a higher pay level because you're going to have a discrepancy the other way that you may not have budgeted for. It's just a thought. And in terms of levels, I'm not talking about qualifications, I'm talking about validation levels. So they've actually been in the field, and so they're all bachelor trained, been in the field for a long period of time, but you might put in a new graduate to cover. Let's also consider something like staff PD. They're all entitled to it, but that requires release types. So if a staff member is going to go off and do PD on a Thursday and Friday, which is liable to be already paid for by the organisation, you would have budgeted for it, they still need to be covered while they're away. You need to keep your staff ratios. You're aware that in a few weeks' time, same PD is being run, but it's being run on a weekend. Now, as a manager, let's do this as a manager, this one, you might actually suggest that the staff member attend on the weekend because that's going to save you money. But as a leader, is that where you really want to go? In that you're also aware this is a single mother perhaps, or maybe she or he doesn't have a partner that can look after the kids on the weekend because they work weekends, a whole variety of things. So ethically, you need to balance out what decision you make about saying yes or no to doing the week leadership, or the week PD, or the weekend PD. Just so that those sort of things you need to think about in terms of ethical decision making, which do impact financially. And that's why I wanted to put those two on the table, just to give you an idea of the sorts of things you may have to consider. Okay, is one right or wrong? Not necessarily. But ethical decision making is hard. In particular, it's linked to advocacy and activism. And the reason I start to mention that is advocacy is about being aware of what's about to come and advocating within that for what we believe is right for children. And being aware, and let's go back to the idea that we know that next year is, at this stage, the last year we're going to have 15 hours of preschool education for every child before they go to school. At least that's guaranteed. We don't know what's going to happen in 2016, but we do know that we've got it for 2015. This is when we start to advocate for that. You know, do we write letters? Do we start pushing and letting the government know what's really important about early child education, or do we let it sit? But being aware that's about to come, we start to go back to the idea of strategic planning again and getting ready for potential change. And another example, and big on examples this time around, the change that comes to mind, whether it was which fraught with difficulty for a lot of people, was the government policy which changed the staff ratio for children under 3 years of age. Now, lots of notice was given, there's lots of discussion around it, lots of arguing about it, lots of advocacy going on, lots of activism going on. But in the final wash-up, it was decided to change the under 3 ratio from 1 to 5 to 1 to 4. Excuse me again. That meant that in a room that was built for 10 children, and people were building childcare centres back then for the staff ratio. We knew we had to have 2 staff for 10 children, so that's how we built our rooms. If you were going to keep full enrolment in that room, you had 2 staff. With the changes, if you had full enrolment in that room, you needed 3 staff. Your expenditure has suddenly gone up. If you decided that you would go to 4, you were going to 4 children. If you decided you were going to go to 8 children in the room to keep with 2 staff, you were in a position where you had less money coming in. A financial cost. No additional cost, but a financial cost. So the question then is, how do you manage that? So centres started having to make some decisions about how they were going to work. They worked with families and developed strategic plans around what would they do, what would that look like, what would the structure now look like, what do they think was important for children. A financial implication, a policy change that created a financial implication that needed some ethical decision making and strategic planning. I think this is the first time we've been able to tie everything in and say this is what this unit's all about how we make some of those decisions in terms of the work we're doing. Keeping in mind that our premise is always going to be it's around the vision and the mission and our pedagogical understandings of children, that these other imperatives will impact and we have to make some decisions around. And I think the other thing in there is, we haven't mentioned it a lot, but it always impacts everything I talk about around social justice policies, because my principles and values and around early childhood are all linked to social justice policies. So for me, that sits as the crux of what we're doing. How do you know if a centre is financially viable? And it's pretty evident. Quite often you can't see the books, no one ever gets to show them to you. But it's often reflected in utilisation. That is, the centre is full, it has a waiting list, and it doesn't have a waiting list because there's no other service around, excuse me. It has a waiting list because people want to be there. It has very little movement, the staff are permanent, they don't have a lot of casual staff, lots and lots of staff that are there for a long period of time and not moving out. 2 ideas, 2 thoughts around why those centres would be considered stable. Okay, before you go into mad panics about what this is actually somebody's household budget and a cash flow budget at that. And we do need to consider what we know about finances. These are not as terrible as they look. So, cash flow budget, I'm showing you one from a personal one, not mine. What I wanted to do was just highlight how these look, and centres do have them. I used to draw them up for my centres every year. I would draw them up from when I was working at the children's every year. We had one that would sit there. It helped me keep on track. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Even if you have a bookkeeper in your centre, an accountant or a financial manager elsewhere, and that may not be in your centre, you might be in a large organisation who has a financial manager outside for you, knowing the terms they use is useful. So a few things you need to think about. Did you know that some centres need to pay rent for the building they are in? Electricity, gas, water, telephone and internet. They need to pay for office supplies, computer, pens, paper, office furniture. They pay for consumables, paper, paint, crayons, all those things the children use. They pay for and need to budget for all the furniture, child and adult in the room. Outside, the grass gets mown. The garden needs to be tended. Equipment needs to be purchased and kept safe. The sand pit needs filling up on a regular basis. Did you know to provide for longevity of the indoor and outdoor blocks? And I put this down because it seems to be forgotten lately. Those blocks, those big indoor and outdoor blocks that the children use, need to be oiled every year. They cost thousands of dollars, literally thousands of dollars. And if you don't look after them, you're going to be replacing them on a regular basis, or they're going to get chipped and splintered. You need to look after them really well. We used to oil our blocks every year. It was a lovely day at the end of the year where we sit down and chat while we wipe the blocks over with this oil-soaked rag. I'm going to challenge you to think about the cost of some of the equipment in these centres. Go to the catalogues, and in particular have a look at modern teaching aids or educational experience, windmill and 3+, and look at the prices of the equipment they have in there. It's not cheap. It's not the Kmart prices. They're not the good. These are really good, high quality pieces of equipment, and they're the ones that you should be thinking about. They're horribly expensive, but they're really good quality. So you need to think about this particular puzzle, which has cost me $70. I need to be able to keep in good nick. I need to be sure that it's being used appropriately and not being damaged, and we're not losing pieces. Okay, a bit about cost of stuff. The original purchase price of all your equipment is known as the book price, or also called, it's just the book price. That's how much you paid for it. There is also what's called the market value. Now that's the current value you would sold it right here and now. So if you bought something 2 months ago at market value, at book price value, the market value will be different when you try and sell it because it's second-hand. It's the best way to describe that. There's also what's known as the replacement cost, which is how much it would cost to replace that piece of equipment if you had to, which is going to be higher than the original book price because prices have gone up. Excuse me. So you need to think about ensuring that you've got in your budget a little bit of surplus that allows you to, or you build in a replacement section, which allows you to cover for some of those additional costs of replacement. And I always had a replacement line on my budget, and we had a replacement schedule built in so that we knew that after X number of years, I would have to replace X number of books or X number of puzzles. We had that built into our program and how we worked with our budget. So that's the provision for replacement. There's also a list of what's known as the centre's assets. What do they own? And that's almost like the inventory. So you would have a list put away somewhere safely that would include how many how many blocks you have, carpentry benches, water trays, all of those are listed, and alongside them I would have the book price, the market price and the replacement price. And I'd save that in 2 places. I don't like to have those just saved in the centre. I want them saved on a hard drive somewhere else. But everyone knows about my idea about double saving everything you do. Really important to have those. On top of that, you'd also have a liability list, and that's the things about what you would owe ongoingly. So rent is an example of a liability. A mortgage is an example of a liability that you need to pay out all the time. Personally, you'd have other liabilities, but in centres, they're usually the ones you have. You're taking out a loan for the centre to do anything, you'd be paying that back. That's also a liability. The income statement is just that. It's an income statement. It's produced monthly and it documents what income has been received for the month. So an income statement in early childhood would have all the fees listed in there that you had come in, any grants that came in, any fair relief options that came in, any of those sorts of things will be listed. That's often checked against the cash flow statement, which is what was spent, not this cash flow budget you've got on screen, but a cash flow statement which was what was spent each month. And they should be read together. You know what you did spend, you know what you thought you were going to spend. What you want to know is what was the difference. That helps you understand where you're going. And for me, when I had a difference or a variance, I need to know what it was. Was it unexpected? Did all of a sudden we have a phone blow out for a particular reason I couldn't work out? A personal example. I had a water bill that came in once here. My water bill's not very, very high. Came in one year at over $3,000 the quarter for 3 months, 4 months. I panicked. what in the world was it? And what it was when I checked my balances, and I went and checked the previous payments and the new one, there was a leak under the house that we hadn't found that would be leaking out. Thank goodness it was a small leak, and we were up for a $3,000 bill. It's important to know that other people that said they probably would have just paid it, forgotten about it. I'm glad we didn't. But it's really important to consider that. So if you knew all of a sudden you had to blow out an unexpected bill that was way, way out, you'd want to know why, and you'd want to work out how to fix that. It may be that you had the flu bug, and if your staff were off for a few days and you needed to bring in more relief staff than you expected, that can change your budget and it can put your variance at a different level. So you need to know what they are, and you need to think about, okay, we've actually blown out this month. I need to think about how we can pull back next month. What am I going to do to make sure those costs are in line? All centres will have a cash flow budget, just like this one, which is the expected expenses and increases. Now, mainly they are usually static throughout the year. You expect to spend a certain amount of money each month on a variety of things. Excuse me again. But you'll notice in this one, and this is a personal one, as I said, there's a couple of places where there's money spent only twice a year on an item. And in this one, it's rates. If you look at the expenses section and line 15, we've got rates. They only pay that twice a year. In Australia, we pay us 4 times a year. So this is obviously done somewhere else, or I'm not sure where they've done theirs, but I certainly pay mine 4 times a year. But that gives you a bit of an idea of how you can change these cash flow budgets. So you know that you're going to have a bigger expenditure going out in March, and in September you would budget for that, and you would cater for that, and you would make sure that money was available for that. Basically how a cash flow budget works. When I did mine at the children's, I used to get slapped over the knuckles on a regular basis that they wanted mine to be more in line. I had mine very flat, but there were times when I knew I had a big payment coming up, and I thought, I just won't pay anything more for equipment for the next 3 months, and the staff would agree to it, but we sometimes didn't write it into our cash flow, which didn't go down with finance. But anyway, some terms you need to know, which are important, and you'll see these in a lot of financial statements, and one is actual, and it makes sense. Actual is what was spent. You'll see budgeted, that's what was budgeted for. Think about the statements I've just mentioned. And you'll see variance, difference between the two. Balance sheets are a statement of income expenditure. Now, I always expected a positive variance in all my budgets, and that's the difference between income expenditure was always going to be in my favour. I only ever budgeted for 80% occupancy. Now, that was really important. I'd budget for 100% of my staff, for 100% occupancy, but I would only expect income for 80%. Now, the reason you do that is that it gives you a buffer if you have some children away for a period of time, or if your numbers drop for a period of time. It just gives you a little bit of leeway. If the centre achieved more than occupancy, and it always did for me, we had a positive variance or a credit or a profit. If we had less, there'd be a negative variance or a deficit or a loss. And we didn't want to have to do that, because you have to find a way of reducing costs at that point. What you want is that balance where your fees aren't too high, so no one will enrol, or too low, so your costs aren't met, is what you're trying to find. And I think I've mentioned before that when we were about to open the Children's Hospital Childcare Centre for the very first time, I had budgeted for 80%, and I got called into the finance manager who said, "You're never going to fill it at 80%, we're going to budget for 60%. And here's the new fee," which was huge in those days. It was actually massive. And we knew that no one would come. So I ended up putting my job on the line and saying, "We've got a brilliant director that's about to come in and run this. This is going to work. I have no problems with this. I will go at the end of the year if we can't get this to work." And I would like to thank that director for making sure it did. But it was the difference, and the challenge around that was we understood early childhood, he didn't. And I think there needs to be that balance about early childhood leaders and early childhood professionals being involved in some of those discussions, because they have that pedagogical understanding, but they also have an understanding of the system and how early childhood works. So it's important to be involved. You also need to be aware of the financial year. The fiscal year, financial year, is usually July 1 to June 30. And after June 30, you usually have an audit done on your books. So you have somebody come who checks them and signs off to say that they've been audited, and they are then presented at the next annual general meeting. So 2 points I want to go back to about financial accountabilities. And these are two that are really important for me. I think is that budgeting and monitoring utilisation, really, really important. And 80%, as I've just said, is roughly where I put mine. Some are a bit higher, but I think that in general, most are around 80%. And sponsorship of projects and programs. And I still believe very clearly that if you're given money from an outside source for a program, every cent that you get has to be spent on that program. You can't do it any differently. Okay, just in terms of the income and expenditure cycles, and just I think the three most important things we're talking about here is trying as much as possible to maintain full enrolment, or an enrolment that's in line with your budget. And the second one is looking at this revenue cover per child cost. And I hate using this term, but basically you need to know how much it costs to run your centre per child. And that helps you with understanding your enrolment. Under 3s are more expensive than over 3s. And it's not hard to work out when your staff ratio is different for the two groups. And there's more resources required for the under 3s. And the other issue you need to consider is your full fee collection, and what do you do with, as financially, that would say bad debtors, or people who delay in paying their fees. And that can be a real problem. It can financially mean you can be in a bit of strife if you've got somebody who habitually is late or simply misses a month with fees. Okay, this comes straight from your set text, page 206, and it's what you're going to be working on for your tutorial. So I just want to give you some background about what this is. You can re-get the details from the set text if you wish, excuse me. So what you have is this table comes as finances of some centres that was part of a research project which we're looking at quality. Now each of these centres have been rated at high quality. Things to note, each one of them is a not-for-profit. It's not commercially based and commercially sanctioned. In your set text, this is broken into two graphs. There's a line in the centre which talks about what that bottom section is. That bottom section from staffing is around percentage of budget for those particular areas of discussion. Centre 1 and 2 are operating in university. So they'll be operating generally at a higher staff ratio, just a point to note. Centres at 4 and 5 are standalone centres. They're centres on their own. And Centre 3 is also by a large charity. And when we're talking about charities, we're not talking about the Good Start organisations and corporations. They are not. They are for profit. We're talking about things like the Free Kindergarten Association or the Anglican Free Kindergartens, or those sorts of groups who are somewhat charitable groups. Centre 6 is a different type of centre. That's an integrated service. So it has education and health components. And what we mean by integrated service, it may have maternal and child health centre in there, those sorts of things. Now, what does it mean when we talk about an aside? It has their licence capacity. Licence capacity is the total number of children who can attend or enrol on, enrolled on any one day. So you can have no more children than 51 in Centre 1 on any given day. That doesn't mean you only have 51 children enrolled in the centre. You may have a large number of part-time children in the centre, which would mean you would have more children over the week than you actually licensed for, if that makes sense. But you may have a child taking up, say a place taken up by 30 children. Somebody attends Monday, Tuesday, somebody else Tuesday, Wednesday, and a third child on Friday. Number of families is the second line, and the reason that's put in there is it gives you an idea of the number of part-timers. It just means you've got more families to deal with. So if you have a look at Centre 6, 86 is their licence capacity, but they have a total of 225 families through that centre each week. Huge number, and it's how you manage that. you look at Centre 2, 40 is their capacity. They have 50 families. It's almost, and I'm sure there's some part-timers in there, but it's almost 1.2 children, per family. It's a very small ratio. Much easier to work with because you've got less families you need to get to know. Staffing, excuse me, and remembering that this is around percentage of budget that's given over to these particular areas. So the staffing includes a few extra components, though. It's not just salaries. It includes superannuation. It includes workers' compensation, and it includes professional learning. Workers' comp changes from year to year based on how many injuries were associated in that particular sector for the year. So that can be a little bit of a movable feast, but it's a percentage on your staffing salary. Accommodation, things like gas, electricity, cleaning, security, those sorts of things would fall under accommodation. They're the sorts of things that you would have as a shared resource sometimes if you're in a centre. We've got centres 1 and 2 there who are on the university campuses have got very low accommodation because they'd be using in part the university's security, the university's cleaning contract, whereas the other centres at the other end are going to be using slightly, especially those Centre 4 and 6, the standalones are going to be doing those contracts on their own, so it's going to cost them a little bit more. And you also got the administration costs. So that can alter depending on things such as, do you have to pay for your bookkeepers or your accountants and those sorts of things? Can you share some of your administration with somebody else? That varies, and you'll notice that Centre 3, which is a centre that is also as well as charity, they have larger administration costs, so I find kind of interesting. Programs, that's where your consumables, your programming consumables come in, your paint, your paper, all those sorts of things. Equipment, furniture, furnishings, resources, laundry costs. I find it interesting that Centre 5 has only spends 1% of their budget on those resources. I find that kind of fascinating. I'll leave it to you to think out why. Building, that's where you start looking for this things around repairs, maintenance, insurance, rates, gardening costs, those sorts of things. Excuse me again. Will come into that. And then you have profit. Now you'll notice that all bar one centre there has a profit margin. That the two on the left, Centre 1, Centre 2, are university based, so they are going to be getting additional funds from the university. It won't be so much of a problem from them. The profit is used for the others for buffer against rising costs or drop in enrolment, as I said earlier. Emergency relief is on families sometimes, and replacement of equipment. So that's where you build those in as well. Now, in page 209 of your set text, there's a really nice reflection about a centre who factored in a fee rise to parents to keep a staff member who had recently upgraded their qualifications. Something to keep in mind, but it's worth having a look at. Well, I haven't mentioned there, but I think it's really important to note that in qualifications, there are annual capped increments to the base rate of staff. They also need to be factored in. So if you know that you've got 2 staff members who are going up a level next year, you need to increase your staffing budget to ensure that that's covered. And that also increases your superannuation costs and a few other things as well, which can mean an increase in staff. So if you've got staff that stay on, and we know that staff stability helps support quality program, you are likely to have slightly higher fees because you've got staff that are been around for a long period of time and functioning at that top end. Okay, so your task will be, and I've put the one page or 2 pages, I think it is, with these details back on it, and the questions from Wangaleen, is to work through those questions and really think about what happens with finances and what happens with financial management and leadership. Where does that fit in? So to help you think about this particular table and what you're seeing, and think about some of the implications for leadership. And that can get posted into Leo in the page 9 module, sorry, week 9 module, of which I put up a forum for each tutorial. The references, Prowalski's reference, which is a fabulous book on managing children's services, and Mangela's book again, and that was chapter 12. I think I asked you to also look at chapter 13, which would be useful. You've got until the end of semester break. I hope you get it done by the end of this week so you can have a bit of a break during semester break. And then we'll see you all in week 10.